All right, hello class. Dr. Brome here. Here with Matt Wenning, who is a world-class powerlifter, one of the strongest guys, as far as I know, has ever lived. And he also has a master's degree in biomechanics and a wealth of knowledge in physical training, but also training firefighters particularly. He's worked with the Army and with firefighters and with police officers. And I'm just going to let him tell you the particulars of that, but that's what brings him to our class today. Is this guy knows what it means to be ready and fit for duty as a firefighter, both mentally and physically. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, not a problem. So I started lifting at the age of 11, and obviously it was very young. It was just something I did with my uncle. My uncle was a steel mill worker and was always really fit, but never really stable. So he would come in and out and live with my mom and dad, stay in the family room, and had this sand-filled weight set. So I would train with him, and about a year and a half goes by. My uncle's very impressed with how strong I am right off the rip, and was like, "You need to start working out more. You could really be super strong." And I'm thinking in my head, like, I'm just a kid in this small town neighborhood. I don't know anything. And so my mom gets me a membership to the local YMCA, and just so happened there were two guys in there that were both national caliber. One of them was a national record holder, a 500-pound bencher at 181 pounds body weight. And this was in the 80s. And so in the early 90s, I come along. I'm in sixth grade, and these guys think I'm in high school because I'm like already 170 pounds. And they're like, "Wow, you're really big for being a high school kid." And I'm like, "I'm in sixth grade." And they're like, "Whoa, you need to start coming and lifting with us." So I start lifting with them, and go on to break every state record from the age of 13 to 20. I won my first world title at 19. I win 3 collegiate national titles, only getting second place one time. I broke every American record in the drug-free collegiate nationals and American records as a junior. Turned pro at 24 and was one of the youngest guys to squat 900. With that being said, that I worked my way all through college as a welder. On the weekends, I would weld at the local hospital when they didn't have anybody that was a specialized service tech that would work weekends, but I only had weekends because I was going to school. So I was right out of high school making $20+ an hour as a welder at a hospital. So every time I had a bill for school, I would just write a check for it and pay. Keeping in mind, this is 1999. So school was like $2,000 a semester. So it wasn't like it was insanely hard to pay for like it is today. I'm so hardworking and so strong that it causes the gear cogs of Dr. Kramer, which is one of the most published professors in the world in strength conditioning, probably the most published professor. I think he's been in over 600 peer-reviewed papers. He was the adjunct professor for Dr. Zatsiorsky, which was in charge of the entire Soviet Union training protocol from 1965 to 1984, where he moved and transferred to Penn State. When he transferred to Penn State, Dr. Kramer was just coming out of school. So Dr. Kramer eventually left Penn State, went to Ball State, and that was my hometown. And we became good friends. And he started me at the process of graduate school. Keeping in mind, the entire time, I am traveling a couple hours one way every weekend to go train with Louis Simmons at Westside Barbell in 1999 to 2005. By 2005, I finished my master's degree. I moved over to Westside Barbell full time, which is why I'm in Columbus now. And within the next 2 years, I was breaking all-time world records. And then I was the first Westside Barbell guy as a full meat lifter to bench 800. I was the first Westside Barbell guy outside of Westside Barbell to squat 1,200. And then I flipped raw and broke 2 more all-time world records and was top 3 to 5 in the world for 16 years. So not only was I insanely strong, but I was resilient and injury-free for 99.9% of that time. The only thing I ever had an issue with was I tore a groin in 2014, which healed in about 6 months. And obviously your little back tweaks and pulls when you're doing those kind of weights, but I never really got any injuries per se. And I started to realize that a lot of it was because I was training insanely smart and I knew what my governor was that day. And that started to really turn the gear cogs into studying not only how to train to get stronger, but to train to be around longer and smarter. So I would say about 2006, I get into a magazine, just a little, it was like a Muscle and Fitness, but I think it was Flex magazine. And they did this big article on like the top lifters in the world. And I was one of them. And at the end it said, oh yeah, and this badass dude also has a master's degree. Well, that caught the attention of at that time, a major that was in charge of the physical fitness program for 3rd Battalion Army Rangers. So he messages me, I get this cryptid email from the government. Hey, would you like to come down to 3rd Battalion Rangers and take a look at our fitness program and see if there's anything that you can help with? I don't know anything about tactical at all, fire departments, anything. But I do have a background in biomechanics, and I am very strong, and I know mechanics very well with lifting. So I go down there and I see what they're doing, and it's not optimal. And I basically tell them what I think without really caring whether I stay down there or not, because it's the middle of summer in Georgia, and I would much rather be in Ohio. It's just way too damn hot for a 300-pound badass, right? So they like my honesty, and they attempt to apply what I'm telling them. And within a year, the injury rates dropped 30% at Ranger Regiment, with the performance ratings going up. A perfect score, I don't remember exactly, but a perfect score back then was like a 300 on the Ranger test. The average was 240, and when I left, it was 285. So the performance rates jumped up, 20%, but the injury rates dropped 30. Well, that caught the attention of a massive 3-star general named General Anderson. General Anderson was in charge of all of 4th Infantry at Fort Carson, Colorado. That's 6,500 ground troops. So he calls me and asks me if he thinks I can put into play the same thing I did with a small special unit of about 550 to 700 guys, if I could do the same thing with 6,500 ground troops. I don't know if I can, but I'm going to try. And it's basic, simplistic stuff. I'm not trying to change the world with anything, but what I am doing is making sure that they start cutting back high impact movements, increasing bone density, and reducing weaknesses. So what you find with general physical training, whether it be fire service or the military, it doesn't matter. It's all anterior dominant. So let's look at running, right? It's forward. Sit-ups is forward. Push-ups is everything anterior. But what you start realizing is they're ignoring everything where the injuries are. So my thought process was, look at where the injuries are, go talk to the physical therapists and doctors and say, where are we seeing all these injuries in these populations? Knees, lower back, and shoulder. So I start realizing, well, this is a posture and posterior chain weakness area. So I flipped 75% of my training on glute ham raises, belt squats, 45-degree back extensions, things of this nature, actually isolating the areas in which I know are key injury points. Once we start doing that in a fairly educated fashion, wouldn't you know it, the injury rates drop dramatically. Because the problem with running is that although it's a great cardiovascular tool, it's high impact and it's very damaging to people that are very weak and or overweight, which is a lot of the fire service and now a lot of the military. So with that being said, it starts to really see the gear cogs turning. Now, Border Patrol seeing what I'm doing, airborne divisions are seeing what I'm doing, and the local fire departments in the area are seeing what I'm doing. So once that happens, I start applying the same methodology to the fire services here in town and these other contracts that I get in short bursts. And every time it comes out with the same result. So by the year 2017, one of the fire departments that I'd had at that time for nearly 10 years, I went from spending $550,000 in insurance premiums to under $100,000. That's a $450,000 savings per year. Now I can write my check. So now the eyes are open with these other fire departments. They want this reduction and they're willing to do whatever I tell them to get it done, because now it's a money savings issue. So where I think the biggest problem is in the performance sector is you think you're going to come in and sell performance, like you're going to perform your job better, which, don't get me wrong, that's one of my top priorities. But at the top tier, if you can't show money savings, you're not going to get in there and you're not going to be there very long. The problem, and it's sad, but fire chiefs and et cetera do not care about performance. They care about showing savings in costs, because that's what gets them reelected. That's what keeps their job. That's what passes levies to the general population. We all live under this stigma that we think that because someone's a fireman, they're big and strong and they're really fit. And in reality, they're very weak. They're not fit. And that's why we have the injuries that we have today. So for what I try to do is create structural balance, nutritional guidance, and try to change the thought process of the fire departments in and of themselves to create a better environment. But at the end of the day, the reason that strength training is so important now with the fire service is, one, the gear gets more protective as we get more advanced, but it also gets heavier. And two, the average population weight is not changing. It's not changing for the better. We're getting heavier, we're getting fatter. And now an average person graduating high school weighs nearly 50 to 80 pounds more than they did 60 years ago, when all of these fire tests were initially designed. So you dragging a 170-pound dummy for 100 feet as a physical fitness test, so you're running on 8th graders all the time? No. So maximal strength becomes a huge component in order for you to not only do your job, but not pay for your job when you retire.
I think that's great. And what you say about kind of the politics of it, I mean, it's the ugly truth. You know, we'd like to think that it was just all about saving lives and performance and all that. Performance certainly matters to the guys on the truck. But when we talk about a culture of safety, and you and I've talked about this before, that what you find is this sort of mentality of I've paid my dues, and so now the younger guys have to do stuff, and I'm going to kind of be over here, and some even kind of take on this posture of, well, I'm sort of mentoring, you know, as the younger guys do all the work. And so there becomes this culture of kind of sitting back. Another thing that you brought up that certainly is with my experience too is how many guys on the job will work primarily another construction job, you know, doing remodels or whatever on their day off, and then they bid a slower firehouse, or they try and do whatever they can to kind of rest up on the job rather than, you know, using the days off from the job to rest up. What do you think about the recovery efforts, and how do we change the culture of the fire service to kind of change the way it's doing it?
Well, there's multiple faucets to what you're trying to go into. One, 75% of the population is magnesium deficient. Magnesium is primarily responsible for not only insulin response, but also sleep quality. So if 75% of the general population, including the fire service, is deficient in magnesium, we already have a huge issue there. The other thing that you find is that most fire departments, we know the number one killer for fire service is cardiovascular issues. And we would love, absolutely love, even myself, would love to blame that on the job. But what you need to blame it on is nutrition and sleep patterns and recovery patterns. So what I say is we need to have a better thought process on what's important on our off days, right? We need to stop worrying so much about what we need to be doing while we're on duty versus trying to restore ourselves from poor sleep patterns that we cannot control on the days that we work. You know, your natural growth hormone output happens around 1 a.m. Well, if you're awake after, say, 11:30 and you don't get that boost, you're really not getting any sleep quality at all. And the big problem is that somebody clocks out, you know, out of their 24-hour shift, and now they go work an 8 or 10-hour construction job because they got 16 kids, a truck they can't afford, and a big house they can't afford. And then they're worried about, you know, coming into the fire service and just trying to do bare minimum because they're exhausted. And it's not because of that day. You know, again, you know, I became world-class strong because when I would train, it was all about recovery after I trained. And you have to look at your 24-hour shift as a training shift. You have just put your body through some exhausting things. So if you think you're going to be on your feet on concrete doing a construction job for 8 or 10 hours a day, and then because you get to go home that night, you're going to recover, you're vastly incorrect. And then the other problem is that most of those guys are eating fast food for every meal. They're not prepping meals, and they're eating insanely inflammatory diets with their high in gluten, high in processed dairy, and high in refined carbohydrates, which is causing the triglycerides and cholesterol to be explosive. And then that's why you have these cardiorespiratory issues, and also reducing energy and increasing fatigue at the job.
I think one of the things I learned from you on your YouTube channels and stuff is that magnesium part. For me, when I was a captain, I was a pretty young captain at the time, probably mid 30s, ended up with irritable bowel syndrome.
Mhm.
And so much of that just absolutely cleared up once I started, paying more attention to electrolytes and things like that. But at that period of time, electrolytes weren't focused on so much. But since I've watched your materials on this, read your materials on this, I'm like, I take way more magnesium now, and it's like I never had the problem. And my doctor that I went to said, well, it's stress and it's this and that. And of course it's stress, lack of recovery, all those things that you're talking about.
Yep.
But it was that mineral deficiency. And I know too that in your book, The Tactical Athlete, you go into having what kinds of supplements you use and what kind of supplements you think are necessary. Besides magnesium, what other things are you looking at with that?
You sweat a lot, or you're around a lot of toxic materials. Zinc can also be completely dissolved out of the body. And zinc is a primary factor for natural testosterone. So how many fire guys do we know they're on testosterone replacement therapy, and what they're doing by going to the doctor and getting testosterone, which I want to slap a lot of doctors in the face. But the reason that they're doing that is they're trying to put Band-Aids on bullet holes. You have to ask yourself, why is testosterone low in the first place? Well, one, sleep quality and magnesium is low, so that's a spiraling effect. Two, you're around toxic materials, which is also your fireproof gear, which is drawing other minerals out of the body. Zinc is one primary one. And then you're eating a highly inflammatory diet where the body's not only fighting these external factors, but you're internally poisoning it, causing all these other issues as well. But the big thing that people don't understand is what these supplements I'm talking about, you can't just go to Kroger and get them, because the FDA doesn't regulate what supplementation is. So they could be selling you sawdust powder, telling you it's zinc or magnesium, and it's 100% legal, which is absolutely scary. So what you find is a lot of the top level athletes get their stuff from Canada, because the Canadian government is so strict on supplementation that supplements up there are treated as drugs. So if you get magnesium, say glycinate, which is my favorite for firemen, you get magnesium glycinate from a Canadian brand, it has to be exactly what it says on the bottle, or they have to shut their doors. So my point is everything you're seeing in the GNC and everything you're seeing in Kroger, I would say on an educated statement that 75% of that stuff is complete garbage.
That's really important to know, because it seems so cost effective, and maybe cutting some money here and there might be worth it, but in the long run, if you're not getting what you need. In reading your book, you talk about a bunch of different training strategies that are necessary. You hit a little bit on that absolute strength, or that max effort strength, and what that does. What other kinds of strength training do you think that all firefighters need to be doing on a regular basis?
That's a great question. They could go on for a lot of hours, but we'll try to make this as simple as possible. One, you need maximal strength for one major purpose. Maximal strength makes everything else easier. All the other strength types make it easier. If you watch my videos and you've seen it before, why can I do 405 for 20 reps on the bench? It's because I bench 600. Right? So it opens up the door for the repetition effort to be able to use at a higher intensity, because you're stronger. Again, if I'm stronger, I can use the dynamic effort method. And we're going to talk about these for a minute. So for the viewers that don't know what this is, we'll talk about it. But I just want you to start absorbing that maximal effort changes everything. If you're stronger, then you can use a higher weight for your speed work because you're stronger. So what I'm starting to get you guys to understand is that strength starts to regulate everything. And I don't care what anybody has told you, that maximal strength needs to be treated as such. And it's why the Bulgarians 60 years ago based everything off of maximum strength, and the Russians learned off of that. Now, maximum strength is also insanely important for tactical divisions for another reason. One, it increases internal and external motor coordination. This means not only can you control your body better, you can control an external weight better, i.e. a tool, a body, anything of that nature that you have to move or adjust. You have a better motor control to be able to adjust to those muscle groups and the external factors. Now, tell me, in what position physically does that not matter? It matters in every physical position. So that's maximal effort to a T. Now, maximal effort doesn't necessarily mean, for lack of a better term, balls to the wall. It means anything above 90%. So if you read the manual or you read my articles or anything I talk about, I have seen for the last 30 years, 90% produce the same result as 100%. So by doing that, you're starting to learn to conserve energy. Here's the difference. A 90% effort, the body can 100% recover from. A 100% effort, as you all know from your powerlifting days, when you go to squat 650, you're beat up for 2 weeks. When I squatted 1,200 pounds, I'm beat up for 2 months. That's a 100% effort. But if I only go to 90%, I might only be sore for 24 to 48 hours, and now I can train again. So for a person that's not competitive, 100% is completely worthless. Now, with that being said, there are two other major methods of training. You have the one that's most commonly known, which is the repetition or repeated effort method, which is a sub-maximal load. Let's just say we bench 300 pounds. That would be like using 200 pounds for 3 sets of 10. So you're using somewhere around 70% for 3 sets of 10. That is the repetition effort method. Repetition effort method is also very, very useful and needed in the tactical divisions for a multitude of reasons. One, lactic acid threshold. You can be the most fit guy in the world, but if you cannot control or are used to having high lactic acid tolerance, you're worthless, because as soon as you start burning so bad you can't move, what can you do? Zero. So maximal strength's not good if you're not in shape. So what you find with the repeated effort method, if used correctly, i.e. winning warm-ups, then you're going to be able to not only be comfortable with being uncomfortable, you're going to be highly functional in an uncomfortable state, which the average person untrained is not. So the repetition effort method also has another major key component, which is ligament and tendon density, which is keeping your body not resilient to being hurt. So with strong ligaments and tendons, which is time under tension, those actually get thicker and stronger. So high impact, slipping and falling, things of that nature with the repetition method reduces injury, which is insanely important. The last method that you need to have in play on a consistent basis is the dynamic effort method, which is not very commonly known in America. It's very known in the Eastern Bloc countries. And that is a sub-maximal load at a high rate of force. So this is a particular load that you're moving with maximum intent, which for Louis Simmons was always stating around 0.7 meters per second. And I'm more in the 1.0 meters per second range, especially for athleticism, because I feel that it hybrids and helps the maximum effort method more, because the problem is when you go too heavy for speed work, the body senses it as closer to maximum work. Therefore, neurological fatigue is much higher. So having those optimal percentages is very, very important. No matter what kind of training you do under the sun, those three methods, you're using one of them in some way, shape, or form. So to not understand those methods is to not progress or not do it very smart.
Well, and I think your book really puts it out there with all three of those methods and describes them in a way that, like you said, I mean, for us to cover them in a video like this for the students is hours. And really, to be truthful, to get to where you understand these in the way that you do, it's years of study. It's not a conversation. It's a practice, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important to understand, is that as becoming a firefighter, it's about setting the tone for yourself now before you even get into the academy, and saying, okay, I'm going to have certain standards for myself that I'm going to do.
Sure.
So I don't get hurt and things like that, because the reality too is, even if you're going to take that side job, if you take that side job and you get screwed up falling through a floor or, whatever, and I've had stupid little injuries myself, that'll take you out of that other job too. And that other job, if you're doing it, by contracts and stuff like that, that's going to hurt your income. So
Yeah, you're
it's a,
absolutely
it's a family thing, really. It's being strong enough for your family, being strong enough for your community, and being strong enough for yourself in so many
and
ways.
teammates. I mean, that's another big thing too, is don't be the weak link in the chain. If you got 5 guys on a run and you're the guy that's out of shape and you're the guy that's weak, that means the 4 other guys got to pick that up, which makes it 20% harder on them.
Yeah.
If you look at 5 guys, each guy's got a 20%, a 20% load, and you're the weak guy that can only do 10%. Now everybody else has got to uptake that load. And that's the other thing that I don't understand. We always talk about camaraderie in the fire department. We should be setting standards to each other, to where I'm not going to let you be a weak, out of shape guy, and you're not going to let me be a weak, out of shape guy. That should be the standard. And I don't understand how we want to protect each other's salaries and protect each other's retirements, but we don't want to protect each other's bodies. Like, give me a break.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant, and it makes me think about some of the things you've talked about in your videos about being at Westside, and how there was some competition and that kind of thing. Certainly that's for world-class powerlifters, and you guys really, set the tone for so much in that sport. But there still is something there in the group synergy that is important. And I, even as a fire captain, what I did is, if my guys didn't want to work out when the other guys that did work out wanted to work out, I couldn't make them work out, but I could make them come to the weight room. And I said, you can sit on a bench and you can watch TV if you want, but we're doing this as a crew. And I was full within my authority to do that. And what happened is, pretty soon the guy didn't want to sit on the bench. He got on the treadmill, or he started doing some stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you got to create that team atmosphere. And if it takes that kind of push to do it, then that's great. The nice thing we have in Ohio is that if a department has a wellness program intact, you are required by law to do it. So that helps us tremendously, because what you find is that I think everybody deep down wants to be in better shape. They just are, their egos get in the way. They don't want to look like the weak guy. They don't want to look like the out of shape guy. I don't care what kind of shape somebody comes into, but as long as you're working to getting better, and that's the hardest part that we have to actually interview for. I think that we need to figure out a way, when people are interviewing for these jobs, to figure out what kind of person is this person really. And I don't think that taking a written test tells you anything. No. Some of the worst written test people, I was a terrible test taker, but I was one of the best biomechanical persons to ever come out of Ball State University. So what does that mean? That means that sometimes what we have in place to test if somebody is aptitude is good for the job or good for the camaraderie of the group is usually not a good indicator.
Yeah. I think one of the psychological effects of working out that always affected me was that where those limits are if you're constantly testing yourself and you're constantly working. So you don't make stupid decisions on the fire ground, bite off more than you chew. But the other thing is that I found that the guys that were out of shape, they'd go into the weight room with the other guys that weren't, and they'd work out a little bit, and it would remind them how dangerous their next call could be. And there's almost like this paradoxical pushback that going into that weight room after having not sustained for so long became now all of a sudden in their face. Well, crap, I can't even lift. That bar's heavy for me. These guys are putting 45s on the bar, and the bar with just a couple of 10s feels heavy to me. My next call is majorly more dangerous, right? When you start doing those comparisons. And so I think, for me, it's a matter of conscience. You talk about the teamwork and being the weak link and stuff, but you really have to ask yourself. And for me, I've been trapped in the building and almost didn't make it out. And I think I made it out partly because of my physical fitness, partly because of the mental tenacity I had to keep trying to get unstuck. But I also felt like I had a moral obligation to my family and to myself and to my partners to do everything that I could to survive that. But it comes after you've done everything every day you can to survive that, not just wait until you get trapped.
Well, and that's the thing is, consistency beats intensity. I'd rather have a guy that wants to work out 10 years straight at a 3/4 pace than a guy that wants to go 100 miles an hour and is constantly injured because he wants to train like an idiot. The body only adapts to training, and it adapts very slowly, and that's what you have to remember is you'll have some people that are genetic freaks and they train for, say, a year or two, like a Julius Maddox, and then all of a sudden they're a 700-pound bencher. But in reality, most people aren't that way. They're going to have to put years and years and years of work in. I did. Mm-hmm. So what you start finding is you got to create that culture. You have to create that mindset that you're just willing to get better, and you're going to be here anyway. And if the place has a gym and you can train on duty, it makes no sense to me why. It's that whole thing that people don't want to better themselves. I got up this morning. You saw the post probably I had on Instagram. I had 5 books on my kitchen table. I had articles written, and I had already written 3 new YouTube videos by the time I left for work.
Wow.
But here's the thing is like, I realized, probably with my dad passing as a young man, or actually a kid, I was 13, that you don't know how much time you have. Right. Louis just passed away. He didn't know how much time he had. He tried to put out as much information as he could and with what he had to help as many people as he could. And I started to feel that push about when Charles Poliquin died about 2018. I started thinking to myself, like, man, I got 20 more years and I'm going to be in my 50s. And I don't know how long I'm going to be here. And I sure as hell know I pushed my body physically harder than Poliquin ever did. And he died at 57. Sometimes you just don't get to choose when you go. And for me, it's always about leaving a legacy. It's always about being the best you can be. And that not only has to do with education, but it also has to do with physical ability. Socrates made a statement thousands of years ago, and it was about, it's a shame for a person to never know how physically good they could be. And that's true. We should owe that to just ourselves as a society. We're so weak. We're so physically inactive that I'm going to tell you straight out. I have trained Israeli special forces and guys that live in third world, harsher areas, and their physicality and mentality state, the Americans do not want any part of that level of person right now, hand to hand. Yeah. The Ukrainians, the Russians, the Israelis, those guys physically are animals. And I'm going to tell you why. They're living in rougher situations. They're used to not having food and water and having to fight for things and stuff like that we used to be back in World War II. We were tougher back then, and that's the thing. What my point to that is that, you could have got away in the fire service in the 60s and been a weaker guy because the average body weight was 155 pounds. Mm-hmm. But now the average body weight's 220. You could you could get up out of your chairs, whoever's listening to this right now, go to your local grocery store and walk in, and you're going to see 15 people over 300 pounds.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt that at all. In fact, some of the last calls I went to, and I've been retired 12 years now, but I remember my partner and I had to take a guy that was 250 out of a 2nd-story apartment building, and I had to clean that stretcher with 250 pounds on it to walk down the bottom, and my buddy had to almost like deadlift walk him down. We were completely out of mechanical position, but the two of us always were working out together, and we were able to take that guy down the stairs.
You're absolutely right. And you just talked about mechanical position. And this brings up a great point. Why is it so important to be super strong in the classical lifts? And I'm going to tell you why right now. You just hit that. Because the runs you take, you're never going to know what position. What happens if somebody's 300 pounds and falls between a sink and a tub and you can't set up in a perfect position? Well, I'm going to tell you this. If you're an 800-pound deadlifter, it doesn't matter what foot position you're in. You're strong in any position. If you're a 200-pound deadlifter and you don't have your leverages at hand, you're in deep, deep trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about getting information out there and having that will to do that. And I think that that's a good time to say, Matt Wenning has on his website, realmattwenning.com, has the Tactical Athlete book. One that I just became aware of is his over 40 book for people that are over 40, need to get in shape and actually train. I'm gonna read that book, because even though I've been training and keep training, and I even still do some recreational competing, I know that there's valuable stuff in there. What other resources do you have that guys can go on and learn from you?
Well, the nice thing is if you go on winningstrength.com, so my Instagram channel is Real Matt Winning. The website is winningstrength.com. So just like you see on the shirt, we do a lot of different things. So we have a tactical train heroic where you can go on, we design workouts that we're actually doing with our fire departments, and you can go through them and you can see videos of every exercise of either myself or my assistant doing, and it tracks all your volume. It makes sure you're doing the exercises in the right order, and it's giving you the best possible training experience you can possibly have at a very affordable price. The other things that we have is Patreon, which is where you can come on, and it's a Q&A board with a lot of special projects. Actually, I just shot a video. It's going on Patreon only. So think of it as YouTube on every performance enhancing drug you could possibly imagine. I just did a video on all the things Louis Simmons taught me. It was like a half an hour long, and that's only going on Patreon. So we keep a lot of the really high level stuff behind a paywall on that. And then we have the tactical manual. We have hypertrophy manual for guys trying to gain quality muscle mass. So if you're thinner, we have a hybrid manuals like the power building manual, which is somewhere in between powerlifting and bodybuilding. We have the over 40 manual that I just developed for people that need to train smarter as they get older, which is a huge issue, because if you look at your average age of fire departments, they're climbing. I mean, I would say the average age of my fire department guys are between 41 and 44. So that's a huge issue. And so that's pretty much what we do. But then we have the YouTube channel, Winning Strength, and we put out a lot of quality information to help people as much as we can.
That's great stuff. And I recommend everybody go and check out. It's such a buffet of different things that really you can go high level training, world-class level training information to something that's just going to make you just functionally better. I mean, there's something for everybody there, in my opinion. And that's why I was really interested in having Matt come on and talk about his stuff. We didn't even cover, the top molecule level of what he has as far as a sea of information. So I think it's important to really go in there and check it out. Go to the YouTube channel, subscribe, because Matt is one of those people that online is constantly giving away free stuff. And that's why when he mentioned that some of his other stuff is behind a paywall, that's because he gives away so much free stuff that I would encourage you, just take a bite of those things. And if you really want to know, be willing to shell out, really affordable, subscription to do that.
Yeah, we initially created the Patreon channel just to be able to pay for YouTube. And people don't realize how much time, energy, and money it takes in editing to make quality YouTube videos. I spend out of my own pocket $5,000 a month just to make the YouTube videos.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, we really appreciate what you do. I'm really one that wants to get more of your information out of there. I was hungry for this information 15 years ago when I was powerlifting and I was a firefighter and I was training firefighters. I was like, we need something that's just like not a borrowed program. I used a borrowed program from some other guy, and this kind of stuff. But the cool thing about your stuff is it's backed by real data. It's backed by real biomechanics. And the fact is you've reduced injuries. And the one other thing about lifting that I learned over the years was that when you get hurt, you know how to rehab that injury faster. A lot of people just go to an expert, and there's a lot of good PTs out there, but if you go to a surgeon, they'll tell you, I'm going to cut you and then stay off of it forever.
Or, when you do get hurt, if you're strong, the injury is much less severe.
Sure.
That's really what you have to remember. Sometimes you're not going to stop getting injured, but are you off work for 2 days or 2 months or 6 months or a year? I mean, we see guys just jumping off the ladder trucks and shattering their ankles because they don't squat. They don't deadlift. They don't have any bone density. And now they got 70 pounds of gear on them and their bones are just, boom, just exploded. And that's when you start realizing, like, it is very, very important. If you're going to use your body to make money, i.e. fire service, you better be putting some insurance premiums in that body to making sure that it can withstand that. Because here's the difference. In the military, you might only be, in that service for 4 years and then you're out. In the fire service, you have to work 25 now, so if you get on at 20, you need to be in good shape until you're 45. And that's at the bare minimum.
Yeah. I was 42 when I retired, and I still had a squat that was 550,
That's
a raw squat. So it was like, I was fairly young. I got sick and tired of getting up all night. It was that recovery part. And, I was ready to move on to other things. But the reality is you're going to spend more of your retirement. You're going to spend more quality years in that retirement years if you do your duty and you do it well and you stay strong. Like,
yeah, John Russ, and I'm sure you follow him. And I love one of his statements is like, you can either pay a little now to stay healthy, or you can pay a lot later to stay unhealthy. It's up to you.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, thanks so much for your time. And again, it's wenningstrength.com. Go there, get the manuals, read the manuals. They're so accessible. The cool thing I really loved about the Tactical Athlete was that there are some pretty high-end kind of scientific stuff there in a digestible way, so that it's real education, but it's accessible to somebody that doesn't have a kinesiology degree.
Well, and that's the big thing is Dr. Craig, Dr. Newton used to tell me, a smart man can take advanced knowledge and tell it to anyone. But another guy, other guys that don't know everything, they're going to try to over science it. They're going to over talk it because they truly don't understand it. So to truly understand knowledge is to be able to base it down at any level that you need to get it to understand. And I think that I could take an average sixth grader, and with the right talking, I could get him to understand all the methods of training and understand why they're important. That is a real person, where I think Louis had that big, he was one of those guys that, although I respected him a lot and learned a ton from him, if you weren't already super strong or you didn't already have a decent background, he could confuse you very quickly.
Yeah, and I remember reading the articles, and some of the criticisms of his articles was you'd get pieces and parts of him, and it was really hard to synthesize it all together if you really didn't have it. It was difficult to do that. So your packages are the full package. They're cost effective. I mean, it's a really, really small investment for the amount of knowledge you get and the amount of foundational training you get. Anything else? And then there's a bunch of other reading material that's recommended in there too. I have those books on my shelf, and I go through those, and learn stuff. It's a constant learning process, but start the learning process now. Get into using these 3 methods: the dynamic effort, the repetition method, and the max effort method, along with general physical preparedness. And even if that is the things that you program into for yourself, or you follow Matt's programs, you'll get all that, and you will have a nice long career, minimize your injuries. You'll stay mentally happier. Your crews will be tighter if you're all together with that. So is there anything else you want to share before we call it good?
No, I think that's great. I think, like I said, I think the culture is going to change with the fire service, whether we're trying to do as much as we can positive, but it's going to change that way regardless. And the reason it's going to change is because of medical costs. And so, and at the end of the day, do you really want to spend all your extra money on medications and surgeries? Because you don't want to, trust me, taking the knowledge when you're younger and building yourself up and making you resilient is so much cheaper than going and getting surgeries and being on medications your whole life. So make sure you invest in yourself. Don't just invest in, your retirement fund, and don't just invest in your education per se. Make sure that has a delicate balance with investing in your physical body. You only get one of them, and you need to treat it like with some respect, and make sure that you're looking at the guy next to you if you're trying to be in the fire service, and respect his family and him getting out of that building if he gets in trouble.
Thanks a ton, Matt. I appreciate you meeting with me.
Not a problem.